Let's bring in Art Laffer, former Reagan economist and Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, and the author of Taxes Have Consequences. Art, good to see you again. Art, let's get your first read on the jobs report.
Good to see you, Sean.
What do you think of it?
It was a nice report. I mean, one of the things you have to see was 300,000+ jobs, new jobs, which is a good number. But then they revised the last 2 months' numbers down about 110,000. So that sort of offsets it. The one thing I found very comforting, if I may say, is that when you look at the establishment and the household jobs, which are two separate surveys by separate groups, they were diverging very far apart. Now they're coming back together. That's why you saw the pop in the unemployment rate. That's why you saw the pop in the participation rate. Those two numbers are coming back in concordance, which means that we're starting to get a correct picture of the labor market. And that's where we are. One correction that should be made from the previous announcement there is that you're looking at inflation over a full year. This month's growth in wages was way higher than the inflation has been. We had in a monthly growth about zero inflation, but this growth was, I don't know what it was, 5% or something. So real wages in this report showed some sign of increasing, which is a good sign.
Yeah, I think it was 5.2% on average hourly earnings. It rose.
Yes.
And to your point, there was a correction for June and July. 107,000 fewer jobs than previously reported. I think it's a positive, though. The labor participation rate is increasing. And again, that's been an interesting phenomenon for me. Again, you've seen inflation. There's been stress on the American family, and the participation rate has remained low. I think it's a positive sign that we see that ticking up right now, right?
Yeah, but the reason why that was happening, Sean, is because there are two separate surveys being done simultaneously, and then they mix the two together, and sometimes the one number doesn't match the other number. For example, in the household survey, we have had big drops in the number of people employed, huge drops in the household. Now, very nice growth in the establishment, but the huge drops in the household meant that the unemployment rate dropped and also participation rate dropped. With the household survey this time, you got the rise there, which caused the participation rate to rise up to a much more normal number, up to, I think, 20 basis points. And then you had the unemployment rate go up, which was also more people in the survey there looking for work, which is exactly what you'd expect if those two series come back together. So this is a much more reasonable, meaningful number than last month's. And it just shows we have a nice job market. Things are going along well. And now we'll have to see what happens to inflation and what happens as we go forward.
So, Art, to that point, look at the Art Laffer crystal ball. Does this report instruct the Fed at all? What are they going to do? Are they going to continue with their aggressive rate rising? Will they tamper their raises in the future? Where do you see the Fed going?
Well, I think the Fed will continue its rate rising, but that's not what they should do. They should stop price controls, Sean, and let the rates go to where they may be. You know, under Volcker in 1979, 80, 81, the 10-year bond yield hit 15, 16%. I mean, they should just let that rate go. No one would buy a 10-year bond today at 3.2%. That's just not something they do. It's because the Fed is trying to control that interest rate down, and that's the wrong thing for them to do. If they just let it go, they could control inflation much easier and bring the economy back to much lower inflation if they wanted to, and we'd have a good economy and lower inflation.
So, Art, I mean, you worked in White Houses, and so we have the Fed working on demand destruction. And I think you'd make the point, we should work on supply. We should lower taxes, lower regulation. Are there any economists in the White House that are talking to Biden to go, listen, what we're doing is horrible for the economy. Let's change course. Maybe take a little bit of the Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan playbook, and you can see this economy grow. I mean, are there any smart economists in there advising Joe Biden?
Yeah, but they probably don't have PhDs. They probably are not in the anything like the economist role. You need central bankers. You need people who are in business. You need people who understand that the increase in the supply of a product will bring that price down. That's exactly common sense. But the economists have all been trained that the only way you can bring prices down is by crushing demand. And this is where I disagree with my colleagues, the other professors of economics, is that I really think you can bring inflation down by accelerating growth and output and making money tight more attractive. That's the way I'd go about it, just the way we did it under Reagan. We had Paul Volcker letting interest rates rise to where they should be, so money was tight, and then you cut tax rates, increasing output. And you should have seen how the inflation rate dropped, Sean. It dropped like a stone right off the edge of a cliff. I mean, it was the most magnificent, miraculous return to price stability that you've ever seen, with a combination of Paul Volcker and Ronald Reagan together, and they really did the job. This is not my preferred way of doing it. Ultimately, they will destroy enough demand and enough, crush the economy enough that they will bring inflation down, but it will be at very high cost. My solution is not at high cost. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's at more benefits, not higher costs.
You know, Art, I look at Washington, D.C., and I go, this is crazy town for sure. So here you have, you know, the Fed trying to deal with inflation by raising rates. But then you have the Congress and Joe Biden fueling the flames of inflation by spending massive amounts of money. It's like you're pulling in different directions, and it doesn't make any sense. Wouldn't it be better to go, hey, listen, we've got an inflationary problem. Let's all work together. Maybe we should cut spending, and we can raise rates, and we can all work towards one goal of lowering inflation, which are going to help the American people out. But they're going in different directions here.
Yeah, well, you're right, Sean, but you know, this goes to the issue of, should the Fed be independent from the central government? And my view is it should not be.
I agree.
I don't know why Congress passed a law that made the Fed independent, but the president should be responsible for the economy. That should include fiscal policy, the Treasury. It should include the Federal Reserve Board. It should include all the departments and agencies. All of that should be under the president's control, and they should do a coordinated policy. And if they did that, then we could hold them responsible. But let's imagine if we had the Treasury was independent. Let's imagine the Department of Commerce was independent. Let's imagine that trade was independent. Let's imagine the Fed. I mean, you'd have this mix-up of nothing being coordinated. The Fed should be under the control of the President of the United States as well, just like all the other departments and agencies.
But the problem with that, Art, is then Joe Biden would keep rates really low and spend a lot of money, and we'd have wild inflation. I mean, that would be a disaster, I think. I mean, especially with Joe Biden. So
you can't have your cake and eat it too, Sean. You either get them to work together, or you get them to possibly to work every which way wrong. And that happens. With Jimmy Carter, we had some other classics that were really bad. And unfortunately, I think Biden has not done a good job on fiscal policy. And I don't think the Fed has done a good job on monetary policy either.
And here we said, Art Laffer, always smart. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it.